It really is a great pleasure to welcome everyone. I see the numbers are still ticking up, but we have a very healthy participation for this third peer learning exchange on the very important issue of alternatives to immigration detention. You will have heard the electronic voice reminding us that this meeting is being recorded. It is being recorded, however, solely for the purpose of note-taking. As with the previous two peer learning exchanges, the discussion will be held under the Chatham House rule, which means there is no attribution to any of the points that are made. And that is precisely designed to encourage the most frank and candid conversations that I think these exchanges have helped to nurture. This conversation comes at an extremely opportune time. Next week marks the beginning of the 100-day countdown to the first International Migration Review Forum. Of course, yesterday we had the preparatory dialogue for Roundtable 2 of the IMRF. Roundtable 2 includes within it Objective 13 on alternatives to detention. Several hundred participants attended that from tens and tens of member states and stakeholders. And of course, there were reflections there on the issue that we will further unpack today. And of course, at the beginning of this week, the Secretary General released his second report on the state of implementation of the Global Compact for safe, orderly and regular migration, looking ahead, indeed, as he is mandated to do by the General Assembly, to the IMRF and providing guidance for that. So I would very much commend that to you. I'm sure you've all read it multiple times, memorized the most important bits, but the conclusions and I think the recommendations, I hope, feature in the discussions to come over the next few hours. Because today, we really need to discuss how to build on this really impressive momentum that we have managed to generate around the GCM and in this context around Objective 13. I hope we can reflect on how the formal Roundtable 2 discussions and the background note preceding it can have progressive, ambitious ideas for the further implementation of Objective 13 that can feature in the policy debate and of course, ultimately in the progress declaration, the outcome document that will lead us following this first IMRF. I'd also like to flag the pledging initiative that we launched at the end of last year in conjunction with the President of the General Assembly and endorsed by the Secretary General, and hope that today's discussion, I know that the working group has some ideas on this, I hope that today's discussion can lead to sort of further fleshing out of what potential and soon, I hope, actual pledges that can be made in this area. We welcome all of these ideas. I'd also like to flag that the Secretary General's report will be launched formally on the 16th of February in New York at an event hosted by the President of the General Assembly and attended by the Secretary General and the coordinator of the network, and I hope a number of other executive committee principals. That would be an extremely opportune time to hear the voices of member states and stakeholders in support of some of the issues that we are discussing today. Furthermore, we have established a repository of practices, a best practice hub that was mandated by the capacity building mechanism. We need your contributions to this hub if it is to take the shape that I think we all want it to develop into. It is peer reviewed, thus ensuring that only the most exceptional and high caliber practices feature on it. If I have one request today, it is that you, in your respective governments and entities, can reflect on how you can contribute to this hub to bring it to life in the manner that we all want. Connected to that is the discussion space that we have set up as part of the hub, where if you don't have the opportunity to make oral interventions in these virtual platforms, we would very much encourage you to contribute in the written form, and we would ensure that that contributes to our collective understanding of these issues as we head towards New York in May. This event, I think, is a testament to the work of the Network Working Group on Alternatives to Detention, the leadership of the International Detention Coalition, of UNICEF, and of UNHCR, along with the many members from the UN system and stakeholders that make up this working group, really have, I think, created an ecosystem in which we can discuss these very complicated, very serious issues in a frank manner, learning to understand from each other, and that is to our collective benefit. So I would like to commend the leadership and indeed all the members of this working group. I would also like to particularly commend the many champions of the Global Compact who have played such an important role in supporting and leading our discussions on this issue. In particular, but by no means exclusively, I would like to point to the work and leadership of Colombia, Nigeria, Portugal, and Thailand in this regard. We really are incredibly grateful to you all and to all champions. When we set up this initiative, the Champions Initiative, I don't think our ambitions were as high as you have led us to realize they can become. So we're very grateful. And that leads me on to the final point I have as the opening moderator, which is my great honor to introduce a short video of opening remarks from the First Lady of Colombia, Her Excellency Maria Juliana Ruiz Sandoval. We are extremely grateful to her. We are extremely grateful to the government of Colombia for their leadership and their vocal leadership on this issue. So without further ado, I introduce this video. Thank you.
Hola, soy Maria Juliana.
I am Maria Juliana Ruiz, First Lady of Colombia. And from here, my special greetings to Jonathan Prentice, Head of Secretariat of the UN Network of Migration. Greetings to the members representing countries and institutions, as well as to the rest of participants to this third global online peer learning exchange to highlight alternatives to migrant detention. Today is an opportunity to express our commitment as per Objective 13 in the GCM for a safe, regularly orderly migration. It's also a chance to come up with concrete actions for its fulfillment. Historically, Colombia has been a country open to migration under the principles of solidarity and respect of human rights of those that for several reasons had to leave their countries, as it was expressed loud and clear by our president, Mr. Iván Duque. And in the region, Colombia hosted almost 1 million Venezuelan nationals and offered them the possibility to stay in Colombia in a regular way by the implementation of the temporary protection status for Venezuelan migrants. In the strategies to welcome and to integrate Venezuelan migrants, detention was not considered as an option to manage the massive flow of adults and children in our borders. On the contrary, and children and adolescents, we are committed to their integral protection, allowing them free access to the education system, regardless of their migration status. We also provide them vaccination and also against COVID-19 and free access to public nutrition, prevention, and protection systems. I would like to stress that following the Convention on the Rights of the Child, the detention of young boys, young girls, and adolescents is not an option, as it has irreparable consequences for their physical and mental health. That's why we must work together to ensure alternative measures to detention, aiming to their total protection and their access to rights as education and health. The first IMRF is approaching in the framework of the GCM, and we need spaces like this one to share good practices
unidos en diseñar
in a roadmap that may allow us to advance together towards the objective number 13. As a national goodwill ambassador for SDO 17, I'm absolutely convinced of the positive impact of working together, and experience shows that it's useful for managing international migrations. So, when building and implementing pathways to improve the fulfillment of Objective 13 and stop the detention of young boys, girls, and adolescents, current situation, it's fundamental to work in close cooperation with public and private sectors, international cooperation agencies, civil society, involving all actors, and most important, listening to migrant young girls, young boys, and adolescents. Welcome to this fantastic space for reflection and for action. Colombia reiterates its commitment to unite efforts and to work with a collective vision that eradicates the detention of migrant young girls, young boys, and adolescents. Detention is seen in all countries from empathy and compassion, and as the possibility to have a new life in a new home. Thank you very much.
Well, that was a great statement, and I hope very much that the Chatham House rule doesn't apply to that one, and we might be able to post that on our website, because I think it merits a wider audience, but we shall consult with our friends in the Colombian mission on that. Now, to get the first panel underway, I would like to hand over to Patrick Aber, who is the newly arrived, and welcome to this network community, newly arrived Deputy Director of the Division of International Protection in UNHCR. Patrick, it's a great pleasure, and the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you very much, Jonathan. I think I agree with you that there is no better and more fitted introduction to this panel than the words that we've heard, powerful and encouraging from the First Lady just now. And of course, I want to start by thanking the organizers and the states who are sponsoring today's event. Jonathan, you've referred to them, Colombia, Nigeria, Portugal, and Thailand, as well as all the GCM champion countries and other stakeholders that have contributed substantively to the previous events that have taken place in this space. I would like to emphasize that the IMRF will present a key opportunity for all of us to assess, to identify ways to advance progress in the implementation of the GCM, but with a specific focus, we hope, on some of those objectives that have remained, unfortunately, underreported so far. And Objective 13, on alternative to detention, is one such objective that unfortunately didn't feature as high as we had expected enough during the regional reviews. The topic of today, of Objective 14, is one that is of particular interest to UNHCR, as we consider immigration detention to similarly affect migrants and refugees. And progress in the implementation of Objective 14 on alternative to detention for migrants will certainly lift and improve and have benefits for refugees and asylum seekers alike. The purpose of this session is indeed to take stock of progress on alternative to detention since the adoption of the GCM. And in his opening remark, Jonathan reminded us that the Secretary General has just issued his second report on the implementation of the GCM, which notes, and I would like to quote, that there have been a number of encouraging progress made by states in accelerating the use of alternative to immigration detention. Such progress are for us to all take stock of. The report of the Secretary General further underlines that some states have closed immigration detention facilities, suspended detention practices, released migrants from those detention facilities, and moved towards the endorsement of non-custodial alternatives. All of these happening in the particular context of the COVID-19 pandemic. These are really important for us to take stock of. I would like to use this opportunity to extend gratitude and recognize the important contribution of the members of the working group too. in disseminating and sharing some of these promising and important good practices that we are referring to. This happened in the course of the 2 previous peer learning exchanges in 2020 and 2021. On today's panel, we will be hearing from stakeholders coming from civil society, from states, as well as from members of the Working Group 2. And I will be calling on our 3 speakers of today. But we most importantly, in addition to this presentation, want to use this opportunity to hear from states and actors in the ground who are at the forefront of making these alternatives work. And so we hope that we'll be having today a very lively conversation on this very issue of Objective 13 and taking stock of progress. And our first panelist to get us started is Mishka Pile, who is a campaigner and advocate with lived experience, highlighting the importance of working with those that we are here to serve. And so, Mishka, if you are with us, I will now like to turn to you.
Excellent. Thanks, Patrick. Many thanks for that introduction. And first of all, I hope you all are hearing me clearly. Can you
Yes,
hear
I
me
can
well?
hear you clearly,
Great.
and I hope everyone
Okay.
can. So over to you, Mishka, and thank you for
Great.
joining us.
Okay, thanks, Patrick. Hi, you all. Yeah, I mean, it's really great to be here and so great to see representatives from many different states today. As Patrick mentioned, I'm Mishka Pillai. I'm a campaigner and advocate with lived experience, and I'm also a member of the International Detention Coalition grassroots group, which I'll be touching up during my talk. I have first-hand experience of the UK immigration detention, and with that experience, I'm well aware of the realities of detention, its impact on people, not only for people who are detained, but also for their families, friends, communities, and societies as a whole. I mean, so I cannot emphasize how important is that we focus on rights-based alternatives. I will refer to as ATDs because it's easy then, and why it's important for us to move away from the mindset of incarceration as well as enforcement. I will talk about this in more detail during the latter part of my talk. To give the context, during my time, I have been doing campaigns and advocacy around this topic of immigration detention. I have observed and realized that detention is a global issue, even though my direct experience and immediate focus has been the situation in the United Kingdom. People across many different states across the globe are affected by detention, and also, unfortunately, many states across the globe are using detention and considering detention as an essential tool. This is something I have essentially learned when I got the opportunity to meet lived experience leaders from many different countries. And unfortunately, it's quite apparent to me that when I got the opportunity to engage with those people around the globe, the situation on those states are worse in some or many ways compared to the United Kingdom. In addition to detention, my observation and learnings are that many governments around the world have growing tendency towards, I would say, tactics such as surveillance and other creative ways of limiting people's liberty and freedom as much as possible to make their migration journeys intolerable. And I'm really glad that we have started this discussion and we are talking about this, and we are determined to address these issues. Detention comes with various costs as well as impact. I'm sure you all are already aware of this, but I thought I'm going to touch up this briefly using my lived experience because I think it's important to remind this over and over again. Through my first-hand experience, as well as witnessing other people's experiences, if I summarize, for me, detention is all about isolation, removal of personal freedoms, as well as liberty. Quite often, these settings are substandard and unhygienic, as well as really cramped environments. And sometimes people who are being held in these settings do not know how long they are going to be held there. And we have other issues such as lack of healthcare, lack of access to independent legal advice, limited external support. All these wreak havoc on people's mental health, and these have great impacts on their case resolutions as well. And then, of course, the enormous financial cost. Here we are talking about millions, whether it's pounds or dollars. Everything, I just described through the initial part of my talk, bring me to the important point, why rights-based ATDs are important. Here we are talking about system based around support and dignity, based in the community, where people are getting necessary one-to-one support, proper legal advice, access to healthcare, better accommodation in the community. None of these are present in detention. Here we are talking about alternatives that properly identify people's vulnerabilities and providing them specialized support they need. All this lead to better mental health as well as more chances of case resolution. And I mentioned about the financial cost of detention, but rights-based ATDs are less expensive, not just the when considering the human cost, but also the financial cost. And there's a desperate need to shift from the focus on incarceration, enforcement, segregation towards right-based ATDs and allocate the resources, time, and our focus on this. So I convey this message to various states, government to move away from detention to ATDs. And I'm really glad that the conversation has started, divert that focus and resources towards ATD. And during this latter part of my talk, I thought it's important to highlight two very important points or cover two important topics. The first is in the IDC grassroots group. Throughout 2021, IDC has been working with leaders with lived experience of detention and grassroots organizations from many different countries. And we have been co-creating a space to connect, strategize, share ideas, share intelligence, and share different campaigns happening around the world to challenge immigration detention. This has been great and a valuable experience to me, as well as other lived experience leaders. And through this platform, like I mentioned, this is the platform I learned that detention is a global issue that we need to address globally. Being in this group and creating this group have highlighted another important point, which is making lived experience leaders as a part of solutions. Here, what I mean by solution is whether it's designing ATDs, campaigns and advocacy around ATDs, as well as engaging with decision makers. Lived experience, people's lived experience and real life stories are evidence that detention affect very real people. But also the involvement must not be limited to hearing their stories or expecting them to share their experiences only. Instead, it's important to involve people with lived experience in other crucial areas, such as finding solutions to the issue, whether it's deciding ATD models, campaigns, and advocacy, like I mentioned. And it's very important that decision makers, policy makers directly engage with people with lived experience and to learn about the impact, but also sit together.
Thank you very much, Mishka.
Yeah,
I will ask you to sum up in about 30 seconds. Yes. So if you could kindly do that.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you. And to end with, I'm going to end with the quote. This is not one of my quote, but I completely agree with that. Nothing about us without us. Here, us is people with lived experience. Change must be co-designed, co-created, and co-delivered with people with lived experience. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mishka. I think this is really a key slogan that you put into the conversation here. Nothing for us without us. We heard you speak in a powerful way of the fact that detention actually creates havoc on people's physical and mental health. You emphasize the importance of dignity in the alternatives to detention. You spoke about the financial cost of detention and certainly raise the importance of involving people with lived experiences in the solutions to the issue of detention and in advancing Objective 13. And after you, Mishka, I want to thank you again for your contribution. I would now like to turn to Carolina Gotardo, who is the Executive Director of the International Detention Coalition. Carolina is also a co-lead of the Working Group 2 of the Migration Network on Alternatives to Detention, working together with UNICEF and UNHCR. Carolina, I will ask you to kindly put on your camera and start with your statement.
Thanks, Patrick, and hi everyone. I hope that you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Good. I'm very happy to be here, and I'm particularly happy to follow on such strong statements like the presentation from Mishka, highlighting the importance of lived experience leadership, and also the remarks from the First Lady of Colombia, highlighting how migration could be governed without detention and the urgent need to end immigration detention. I want to start by considering all the relevant developments with regards to ATDs and ending child immigration detention since the GCM was adopted, and to acknowledge that there have been some quite positive developments, but also that a lot remains to be done. So we have certainly observed changes in practices at the national level as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, and that gave some momentum to the implementation of ATD. And this was highlighting our first peer learning exchange that was devoted to discussing the learnings from these practices with a view of enhancing them and sustaining them. But there have also been worrying trends, including the expansion of detention in some countries or reverting back to pre-COVID practices in other countries. I think the key point to emphasize here is how some of those promising examples have actually given us a basis to draw from in scaling up and sustaining non-detention practices. I would like to quote again the Secretary General report, which mentions very clearly that the pandemic allowed some countries to demonstrate how to govern migration humanely and effectively without resorting to detention. There has also been some progress at the national level in ending child immigration detention, and this has included harmonization of laws, building on existing practices, development of specific commitments, and monitoring and evaluation frameworks, to name some. We have also seen increased collaboration between different stakeholders working to implement alternatives to detention programs, and some examples are partnerships between governments, civil society, and UN agencies, collaboration with local authorities, or the amazing work done by leaders with lived experience, including grassroots groups, just like Mishka mentioned now. We have had also very good input from UN human rights mechanisms, including the recent CMW General Comment 5, also the Special Rapporteur on Human Rights of Migrants report on ending child immigration detention, and the work of the Special Representative of the Secretary General on Violence Against Children. I will also like to reflect on the importance for governments to work jointly with others, with community representatives, with NGOs, with UN agencies, and with other actors to maintain these very positive practices developed through the pandemic years and to sustain practices that were used before. And the GCM certainly provides us a framework to do this. And on the way to the IMRF, it is essential that we have evidence about existing promising practices and to engage in joint efforts between different actors to promote ATD and end child immigration detention. IDC is working with the Migration Network and with some UN agencies on the development of 3 resources that will highlight promising practices and areas of improvement on ATD implementation, focusing on practices since the adoption of the GCM. So for instance, we are producing a mapping report in partnership with the regional UN Migration for the Asia Pacific and the Global UN Migration Network. And this is mapping detention laws and policies and ATD practices in the Asia Pacific region. This will include an in-depth analysis of 22 countries in the region. We are also working with UNICEF MENA on a mapping project for the MENA region, focusing on ending child detention and analyzing the current situation in around 12 MENA and African countries. And finally, IDC is developing a global resource that looks at ATD developments and practices from different national contexts. This report will also highlight regional practices of collaboration in between different actors, including governments. This will gather the findings and the learnings ahead of the IMRF and will continue addressing challenges and building on the progress in implementing ATD and ending child detention also after the IMRF. I wanted to share with you some initial trends that are coming from the report, and these are very initial, I have to say. But what we're seeing is that many countries in different regions continue to use immigration detention as a migration management tool. This includes the use of arbitrary detention, including mandatory detention in some countries. And other countries have systems that essentially amount to de facto detention. There are other countries that do not use detention as a tool to govern migration, and we have just heard from the First Lady of Colombia how the country has been very effective at managing large migratory flows, and this is without restoring to detention, and this is also the case in many countries in South America. We have seen some promising civil society government partnerships, like the work of the Thai government with civil society, with UN agencies to implement and evaluate the implementation of the MOU, the community engagement pilots in the UK, the recently approved pilot in Malaysia to release some children from detention, implemented with local NGOs. We have seen also governments like Belgium committing to a greater use of case management in ATD and working with civil society as well. We have seen the Canadian government that has initiated the national rollouts of the expanded ATD program that has resulted in a significant decline in detention. Another issue is that children continue to be detained in practice in many countries. However, a number of states across the world are certainly making efforts to work to end child immigration detention and to provide access to rights and services for children and families. Examples, for instance, the Thailand MOU to release a group of children and mothers from immigration detention and provide care in the community. Countries like Indonesia, New Zealand, Japan that do not detain children in practice. South Korea, where children are not detained if they are in school, acknowledging the right to education regardless of immigration status. Provisions in place for undocumented children in several countries in Europe that have been improving. And we see some good practice like the provision of guardians for unaccompanied children or especially service for children in some countries. Countries such as Mexico as well that have legislated against child immigration detention and are now working towards the strengthening of national protection systems and doing this work a lot with local authorities, with civil society and with UN agencies. In the MENA region, we have seen community hosting programs for migrants that have been developed by communities themselves to support others by hosting them in their homes. And these programs support those who might be struggling to settle or face certain barriers. And they reflect how communities can organize themselves and support one another, but they may lack the financial resources to do so. Another trend is that access to services continues to be an issue for those released from detention and living in the community. And releases are certainly a promising step, but releasing people into destitution should not be a practice. We also see specific processes for groups with heightened vulnerabilities and needs that are still lacking in many countries, and the need to improve these processes. So given the requirement that detention needs to be a last resort with non-carceral alternatives explored in the first instance, it's really essential that individual screening, assessment, and referrals are improved. There are other trends, such as lack of data on immigration detention in some regions, that makes monitoring and researching and advocating on issues challenging. And in other cases, data might be disaggregated when it's available. One of the worrying trends is a lack of gender mainstreaming into law policy and practice, both for detention and in ITD settings. And finally, it's worth noting responses based on collaboration amongst governments that have emerged, for instance, in some regions, like in the Americas regions, and that avoid the use of immigration detention by ensuring access to services and rights for those crossing borders. Just to finish, I want to highlight the importance of peer learning when talking about promising practices, because when looking back at implementation efforts with regards to Objective 13, peer learning is really a key element. And there have been several key learning processes that have started over the past few years at different levels. And for instance, we have the regional Asia Pacific peer learning platform facilitated by IDC and the Asian Dialogue on Forced Migration, the cross-regional learning platform, also with UNICEF on ending child immigration detention with UNICEF and IDC, and these specific global peer learnings. And peer learnings show us how coming together between states and stakeholders to share progress, to identify challenges and gaps, and to try to progress on these in supporting changes for migrants and for societies actually bears fruit and help us to advance in this agenda. Our global peer learning exchanges have been key in setting up the foundation for what we call an incipient global community of practitioners that will continue moving forward in the implementation of Objectives 13 and 23 of the GCM, with what is a whole government and a whole of society approach that at the IMRF and beyond. To close, I would just like to express our deep concern about the wide use of detention in many parts of the world, but also the hope that comes from the progress that has been achieved by many of you at the national level towards non-detention practices, and this needs to be celebrated and encouraged. The use of ITD actually changes the life of people and their family, and also creates greater social cohesion. This, alongside Mishka's remarks on the importance of involving leaders with lived experience in our efforts, should be our inspiration in moving forward. And thank you very much for your attention.
Oh, thank you so much, Carolina, for these critical points. You've reminded us that progress is happening across the world in different regions. It's happening in law, as you've pointed to. It's happening in practice. Progress is concerning specific population, including children. You provided a number of such powerful examples of the implementation of alternatives to detention so far as children are concerned in a number of countries. You've highlighted the importance, as you just did, of involving people with lived experiences, but you also reminded us that the work is not yet done, that our progress should not lead to complacency, and the fact that there are areas around which we need to strengthen our work and resolve. And you've pointed to data on immigration detention. You've pointed to the need to pay attention to people with particularly vulnerable population with specific needs, as well as ensuring that those people who are released from detention have access to services. So thank you so much, Carolina, for highlighting these critical points. We will now turn to our third panelist, who is Demet Achik, who is the regional manager on alternatives to detention at the Directorate General of Immigration in the government of Belgium. And as you noted earlier already, Carolina, and Belgium is a country that in fact has created in June last year a dedicated department for the implementation and promotion of alternatives to detention. It's wonderful to have you with us, Demet Achik, to speak to us and share this experience. Okay. So the floor is yours. Vous avez la parole. Je vous en prie.
Thank you. Dear all, thank you for having me inviting here at the online seminar. My name is Demet Achik, and I am manager of the new department, Alternatives of Detention of the Belgian Immigration Office. I will guide you through our approach of alternative to detention. historical and legal context, in the directive of the European Parliament and the Council of December 16th, 2008 on common standards and procedures in member states for returning illegally staying third country nationals is stated that member states should provide for enhanced return assistance and counseling. Following to this, a circular has been sent to all Belgian municipalities on June 10, 2011, to inform them on the founding of CFOR. This abbreviation stands for sensibilization, follow-up, and return. This service aimed to inform persons on their rights and obligations following to a return decision which has been taken by the Immigration Office and to follow up their voluntary return. During the CFOR procedure, the lack of places to stay while the government was organizing the return of families or individuals was a problem. Therefore, open return places and centers and open community-based houses were created. In the open return place, people can stay during the period which has been given on the return decision to organize their return. In the most cases, this period is 30 days. Families in irregular stay with minor children who don't have a place to stay were able to introduce a demand for a place to stay in accordance with the Reception Act of January 12, 2007. They were assigned to an open return center. In practice, families stayed in a family unit. In order to be able to inform families in irregular stay in the best way possible, the return counseling has started. Since the executive order of September 17, 2014, the Immigration Office started the project of coaching. This executive order, in combination with Article 74/9 of the Belgian immigration law, stipulates that families with minor children residing on a private address are initially coached to a return from their own home to avoid that the family wishing to cooperate in its return is being placed under a detention order. Return counseling, the idea behind the coaching is that families with minor children in irregular stay are a very vulnerable group. These families are invited in the municipalities where they reside to keep the threshold as low as possible. During the counseling process, whether to return or not, these families have to take a lot into consideration, for example, schooling of their children, the process of their children growing up in Belgium, the medical situation if they have any medical problems. Due to their vulnerability as a family, they often are supported by a local network in order to make their stay as bearable as possible. Due to this network, other organizations and people they get to know in Belgium, the families get advice which often consists of conflictive and incomplete information. It is therefore very important that the coaching starts as soon as possible after the return decision has been notified to the family to explain the decision and to give the family objective and correct information. Each family is assigned to a coach. Their file is analyzed individually before the first counseling takes place. If it seems like the family has a possibility to obtain a residence permit, the options are explored by the coach. Therefore, the necessary internal services are contacted and the file is submitted to the hierarchy if needed. During the coaching process, the current situation of the family is discussed and the coach communicates open and transparently about the situation. If there are no possibilities for regular stay, the coach encourages voluntary return. If a family is not open for voluntary return, a forced return can be organized. In the beginning of 2014, the coaching process took only one conversation with family. Since 2020, 6 full-time employees joined the team, and the return counseling process has been extended to at least 3 conversations and take about 3 to 6 months. Present and the future. Since October 1st, 2020, there is a new Secretary of State, Sami Madi, who introduced an involving policy for persons in irregular stay. Since 1 June this year, the Belgian Immigration Service has for the first time officially focused on alternatives to detention by establishing a new specific department. Therefore, also the coaching of individuals in irregular stay will start soon. In 2022, 14 extra full-time employees will join the coaching team for families, and 60 full-time employees will be hired as coaches for individuals. Also, the number of open community-based family units will be doubled. In total, 85 ICAM coaches will be working across the regions. Mission of alternatives. The mission was developed in consultation with political authorities. Our mission is to develop alternatives to detention in accordance with national and European legal rules. A whole range of alternatives had already been examined beforehand, from deposit to ankle bracelet to coaching. The political choice was made start first with the coaching of persons in illegal situation. We call it ICAM support project. It means individual case management support. I have to add that this is the first time that the Immigration Service is on the ground to explain their legal administration situation to persons who are staying illegally, and to set out with them in search of a sustainable future perspective. If there are no sustainable future perspective options in Belgium, our coaches try to guide them in a respectful manner towards voluntary return in order to avoid forced return. In the ICAM coaching program, the intention is to organize coaching tailored to the individual. At least 3 conversations moments will be offered. As long as the coaching is ongoing, the order to leave territory will be extended. The client will also be clearly informed at the start of the coaching process that the coaching will stop if he commits public order offenses. The duration of the coaching will depend on several factors: bottlenecks and obstacles, willingness to cooperate. The values. We have respect of our clients, whom we treat with integrity and empathy. We use a uniform working method and respect agreements made so that clients and partners have confidence in our service. We encourage engagement, independence, and constructive collaboration. We share information and knowledge in a safe, innovative, and spontaneous way. And we strive for a quality service by continuously evaluating and adjusting our operations. Working in regions.
Sorry, I just wanted to highlight that you have 1 minute left, so I hope you can kindly try to summarize and conclude.
Yes.
Thank you, Demet.
Yes, maybe it's important working in regions. The ATD department has opted for a regional approach. in which different ECAM coaches are employed per region, with physical presence in major and central cities, locations close to the client. The aim is to spread the new employees over the territory and assign them to a certain region in order to provide orientation and guidance close to the people. And the regional manager has the responsibility to supervise the coordination of new regional offices to optimize partnership with civil society organizations and to follow up the policy plan. And thank you for listening.
No, really, thank you very much, Demet, for sharing this experience, practical experience from Belgium. Again, highlighting the importance of peer learning. We could see from the experience that you presented that there are some elements that speak to the points that were made by earlier presenters, whether it concerns ensuring that these approaches address the needs of those most vulnerable, ensuring that it's closer to the population, that it gives an opportunity to those with lived experiences to contribute. And we look forward to hearing more on this practice in Belgium as it evolves, and ensuring that it fully speaks to this value of dignity through alternatives to detention. So thank you very much to our three speakers on this panel who really help us unpack the issues and highlight key aspects of progress, whether coming from the lived experiences of the persons that we serve, or the experience within the working group too, in terms of promoting, identifying, promoting, and sharing good practice, as well as from states with the experience that Demet kindly shared with us from Belgium. We will now be turning to the more open part of today's conversation, which gives an opportunity to all of us to contribute. I would like to first invite the distinguished state representative to kindly take the floor. And in doing so, I will be asking you to use the raise hand icon, so I see and can acknowledge you and then give you the floor. I'm informed that we already have the distinguished delegate from El Salvador who would like to take the floor. And so please kindly go ahead. You can open your microphone and the floor is yours.
Good afternoon to you. My name is Maria de Los Angeles Guevara. I am the General Secretary of the Immigration Department of El Salvador. It's great to be contributing with you in this type of really important event where we all contribute to the respect of human rights internationally. The El Salvadorian government, through our President and our First Lady and our Director of Immigration, we have really made sure to respect human rights, to not victimize people, and to reflect gender concerns and diversity within our migration population and our population of migrants. And we've tried to do this not just through the processes that we've adopted, but also because our ministry actually makes sure to make that it complies with the objective number 13, which is to take care of these people that are in situations of vulnerability and to not attempt against their freedom. These are people who are asking us for asylum. These are stateless people, even when they don't have any ID on them. And we don't just respect the rights of the so-called NNA, which is boys, girls, and adolescents, but in fact of the entire vulnerable populations, those who've got health problems, the disabled, women, people of an elderly age, LGBTQ people, and also the rest of those people who actually ask us as a government for assistance, so as to be able to have that opportunity that they seek. And we know that these people have been victims of trafficking, they've been victims of smuggling. We know that some of them are even victims of forced displacement. And we know that some of them are disabled, some of them are going through judicial, administrative, criminal proceedings. These are people who haven't got any roots, or they might be victims of crimes or human rights violations, and they're people that need international protection. And so in El Salvador, we have our own pathway, and it's an interesting one because we're actually in interinstitutional cooperation, not just our immigration department, but also the different institutions of the state. We all come together to talk about migrants' care. And through that office, they can actually receive any type of assistance that they need, and it's actually quite easy for them to do so. And you'd have to see the amount of people who actually come in over our land and peripheral borders and do just that. They ask the El Salvadorian government to give them an opportunity, to be able to stay, an employment opportunity. And that's exactly what we do. We offer that up to them, not just our institutions, but our work and social provisions ministry, our police forces, our health service, and our national registers, our national prosecutor's office, and our offices that deal with childhood and adolescents and victims of forced migrations and the development of women. We are those who all work together, and we work together with the IOM, the UNHRC and others, and we do so in a way that allows these people to be able to get the attention that they deserve. And we give them temporary documents while they decide whether they want to stay in our country or not. We don't oblige them to do so. And if they want permanent residence, we give it to them, obviously going through the due process. So El Salvador is very much committed to this objective number 13. We're very pleased to be participating and to be basically putting up for show, if you like, what, in full respect of human rights, we feel that all of us as countries should be doing, and we'd like to share that with you, and we are very grateful to have been provided the opportunity to do so. And we're going to take on board, of course, all of the really excellent suggestions that we're hearing from all the different countries. We're ever more committed to childhood, adolescents, people with disabilities, and anyone who has a problem and who we feel that we can support. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias a la representativa de El Salvador de compartir la experiencia de su país.
Thanks for sharing your experience, and also
de las personas más vulnerables.
Topic on the table specifically for vulnerable persons. And now I give the floor to the representative from Mexico. Thank you very much, Patrick. Good afternoon. Mexico government would like to recognize the migration network, also the sponsors of this meeting, for this third meeting for alternatives to detention. In line with the experiences shared by El Salvador, after adopting the GCM, Mexico has worked a lot in this field, and I will share some of our experiences, specifically in terms of Objective 13. It's very important to say that we have a national policy for protection of children and adolescents, migrants, and when they request for refugee status, where we contemplate different objectives, accompanied boys and girls, and also separated. from their parents, and also for those that request the refugee, also for refugees and for returnees. This framework protects, promotes human rights of this population, also alternative care systems, and strengthening the institutional support. In this sense, in November 2020, the reform in the law according to international protection of the human rights, and we established, for instance, the prohibition of refusing minors in the border, also bearing in mind the prime interest of the little young boys, young girls, and adolescents in the framework of international protection. So one of the main achievements of the reform is to prohibit the prohibition of freedom to young boys, girls, and meaning that in any case, they cannot be retained in facilities, and they will have to be in specific centers for the development of the family. With these reforms that are active since January 2021, we highlight the commitment of Mexico with this population and also for restituting their rights. As Carolina already mentioned, this framework also created coordination, communication with local authorities, and it also allows us to have more cooperation with international agencies and from the civil society in order to continue developing actions in favor of stopping these practices. Apart from that, we had challenges as harmonizing laws, also norms, and the operational part, we need spaces for these people. In conclusion, with UNHCR, the government from Mexico started a new program for housing where we propose alternatives in order to have alternatives to detention with minimum standards. And from June and July, there were more than 1,400 people that could benefit from this project. This is the experience from Mexico, and we are here and available to all the new developments from other countries and associations, which are very important. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias. It's really great to hear the experiences from Mexico in terms of law reform, in terms of practices, and it's really heartening to hear some of the approaches relating to addressing alternative to detention, especially in relation to children. And this has been a common theme that we've been hearing through the presentation and statement that the specific needs of children and other vulnerable population deserve immediate and appropriate responses. So thank you very much. I note that we do not have at present another delegation that would like to take the floor, but we have a question in the chat, which was addressed specifically to you, Demek, about what actually happens when the individual being counseled does not take up the offer for voluntary return. Could you kindly, Demet, speak to that issue, the outcome in case the person in Belgium does not take up the offer of voluntary return? And thank you to Ikuru from UNICEF for putting this question forward. Hello, Demet, are you still with us?
Yes.
Can you kindly put your camera on?
Yes. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Can you explain the question?
Yes.
Yes.
In your presentation,
yes.
you spoke about the fact that your department provides
Yes.
counseling
Mhm.
to individual migrants,
Yes.
and in some cases offers them voluntary return.
Yes.
And the question is about what happens if the
Mhm.
person refuses to take up the
Mhm.
voluntary return.
Yes. We are now in development, in the beginning phase. But in our project, we thought about this. If the people are invited and they will not come, no show, they will get invited again. And then our coaches, that is one of the manners, can also bring the invitation to their home and to invite them again. But if they don't want to go back, we must them inform about the consequences. What will happen if they stay in irregular situation, if they come in contact with police and they don't have their papers. We must inform them and make them conscious about their choices.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, that's clear. Thank you for providing this additional insight into the issue, Demet. We've come to the end of this first panel, and I would like to use this opportunity to again thank all of our panelists for the insight into the progress that has been achieved thus far in the implementation of Objective 13 of the GCM, whether it's in law, in policy, in practices. We are seeing across the world some promising and effective elements of progress. The panelists have spoken to it. We've also heard from El Salvador as well as from Mexico, some of those experiences that regard and they are related to specific population. We were reminded that ultimately alternatives to detention are not only good in themselves because they enable human dignity, they are also cost effective. So there are additional reasons to ensure that detention becomes an exception and that freedom and liberty truly becomes the norm. And this was clearly highlighted by the Secretary General in his reports. And we are now at the time of our break, but before the break, I would like to inform you that we'll be screening a short video. And Jonathan, I think I should turn it back to you in relation maybe to the video and the next steps in the session.
Sorry, just colleagues, can you play the video, please? Thank you very much, Patrick.
No, thank you very much, Jonathan, and thank you to all of you for your participation in this first panel, and looking forward to the second panel that will be starting very shortly after this video. Thank you.
Children migrate for various reasons, including reuniting with family and leaving precarious situations in search of a better life. Some of them travel with their families, while others may migrate on their own or separated from their families during the journey. Every day in over 100 countries, migrant children are detained, whether alone or with their families, because of their migration status. Many governments use immigration detention under the false assumption that it deters irregular migration. Others resort to detention merely due to lack of capacity of national child protection and alternative care systems. Regardless of the reason, immigration detention causes great damage to children, depriving them of their fundamental rights in childhood. This often has irreversible effects on a child's health and well-being, also impacting their families and societies where they live.
We were asked to take everything off, all our clothes off, so that they can check what we have. If you have money, if you have phone, everything you have, they will check away. Every block, and there is around 40 to 45 people staying. Everyone, there's no matter, there's no privacy. There's no consideration of your age. Someone in age of 16 kept sleeping next to someone else age of 60. Going out for 5 minutes was a dream. Myself and many others in detention, we were dreaming and waiting for that day so that we can go outside of the IDC for 5 minutes.
With COVID-19, exposure to the unsanitary and overcrowded conditions of detention increases the impact on migrant children, putting them at higher risk of infections. Under international law, states are obliged to consider the best interests of the child in all decisions affecting them. States should provide migrant children with adequate care and reception, maintaining family unity. With the adoption of the Global Compact for Safe, Orderly, and Regular Migration, governments recognized the need to protect migrant children and agreed to work to end child immigration detention by ensuring the availability and accessibility of non-custodial alternatives. While some governments do not resort to child immigration detention at all, others have succeeded in ending the practice or taken important steps in this direction. However, much more needs to be done. The UN Network on Migration urges states to prohibit immigration detention for children, release all migrant children and families who are currently detained, refer unaccompanied children to appropriate alternative care and families to non-custodial community-based alternatives, include migrant children and strengthen national child protection and welfare systems. Redirect some resources currently expended on immigration detention for the development and implementation of alternative care and reception arrangements for migrant children and families. Strengthen international cooperation and exchange between member states with the support of stakeholders. Immigration detention is never in the best interests of a child. Together, we can end it.
Thank you very much, colleagues who have shown us the video. I just wanted to invite everyone who has been kindly sitting with us and joining us. Feel free to just quickly maybe get up. I do the same myself. Stand up, stretch your legs, stretch your backs. Before we are starting to dive into the second panel of today, maybe colleagues from our IT support can stop the screen share. That would be wonderful. And then I would be very happy to welcome everyone back to the second panel of today. My name is Verena Knaus. I'm the global lead for migration and displacement in UNICEF. And I'm also very delighted to be one of the co-leads together with our IDC and UNHCR colleagues. We've already heard from Carolina, who has provided us with a reflection back. We've already heard from many member state partners who have shared their experiences from El Salvador to Mexico to Belgium, but also Mishka, who provided a bit of an insight into the lived reality and what detention feels like and how it is to experience it in a different context in Europe. So it is a particular pleasure now to not only welcome you to the second panel of today, but to also help and facilitate a discussion that now looks into the future. We've been looking back and I think, have hopefully encouraged you to come prepared to the IMRF with a lot of stories, experiences, lessons learned, evidence, and examples of how countries have taken forward the commitments of the Global Migration Compact in the context of Objective 13. And there are many, many different roads to meeting this objective. There are roads that we have heard and seen that are about changing laws, changing practice, investing in staff, investing in reception and care capacities. But the road can also be about, engaging in a public debate, working and supporting city leadership, working with young migrants, expanding training, sensitization, case management capacities across the board. There isn't just one road. But what we really want to do now today in the second panel of the day is to explore together further how can we build and pave the road towards the IMRF taking place in May? And as Jonathan had said, it is not just important because it is the first IMRF, but together and collectively, we will be setting the precedent on how high our level of ambition is, how concretely we will engage in really reflecting and projecting commitment into the future. So how do we now mobilize and gear up in our minds and our approaches and conversations to prepare ourselves to actually come with concrete pledges to the IMRF that build on concrete country experiences, on peer learning, and how do we inform the progress declaration with those policy experiences, with those practices that we've already heard about, and accelerate progress in delivering on the Global Migration Compact through pledges to be made. Now, we are acutely aware that this is an early moment to really think and discuss pledges. In many governments, in many capitals, the conversation has probably just started, and there's a lot of preparatory discussion and consultation still needed. But what we really wanted to do today is, in a way, initiate that process together. And it is with this in mind that I'm particularly pleased to be able to introduce an incredible set of speakers, starting with IOM's Deputy Director General, Ms. Ugochi Daniels, who will be setting the scene for us for this first part of the second panel. We will be hearing from her from the voice of the leading migration agency, a driving force on the road towards the IMF. But we will also be hearing from Veronica Montoya, who is originally from Venezuela, but currently living in Mexico, and who is herself a migrant rights activist, based not only from her own lived experience, but from her experience, her studies, her context, who will be sharing with us from the perspective of herself and the UN Major Group for Children and Youth, why and how young people need to be at the table, from the beginning of when pledges are being explored and discussed, all the way to the policy dialogues happening at the IMRF and beyond. But we will also be hearing again from our government partners. And here I'm particularly pleased to give you the heads up that we will be hearing from one of our co-hosts from Thailand about the Thai experience, and also reflect together with our colleagues from Thailand how a country can not only be a champion in the national context, but also really be a global champion in driving forward the discussion on alternatives to detention. And I think it's such a pleasure to welcome back our Thai co-hosts for today and to be able to listen to their experience again. But last but not least, we will round off our panel conversation to also hear from another important voice, to have on the table and with us here the perspectives of cities. We easily and often say migration requires a whole of government response. It requires a whole of society engagement. But what does it really mean? It really means it can never be only and solely the responsibility of the Home Affairs or Interior or Migration Ministry. It really does require the active engagement of migrants themselves, young migrants like Veronica, of cities where integration, access to services, but also exclusion, discrimination happens, all the way up to the ministerial cabinets where policies are discussed, investment decisions are taken, but also, of course, laws can be changed or reviewed, to the really important contributions, of course, that the UN system at large is providing to this progress and to the conversation, to the roadmap towards meeting Objective 13, as we will be hearing in a moment from Ms. Ugochi Daniels, who will be speaking and joining us on behalf of IOM. So without further ado, please sit back, relax, or stand up and stretch your legs if you've been sitting for too long. Everything is possible. That's the beauty of Zoom. I'm very, very pleased now to introduce IOM's Deputy Director General. I hope you are with us. I'm just looking through the screen. If I can see, I would invite you to turn on your video if you're here. Yes, wonderful, here you are. I don't know if there is a lot of introduction needed. But I do want to say that you, of course, you have been taking on this very challenging new assignment in IOM with a bag full of experiences. So I don't know which ones to pick. Obviously, your most recent experience with UNRWA, but also your experience of having been a resident coordinator in Iran, your experience of UNFPA, I mean, years and years from countries to regional to global to UN systems. You've been looking at many different issues, and I think it's probably that fresh perspective that we all need when you're now sharing with us your perspectives on where and how really IOM can contribute to that roadmap and is contributing to the roadmap. So it is a pleasure to introduce you and to give you the floor. Over to you, Ms. Daniels.
Thank you very much, Verena, for that introduction. No pressure at all. I'll certainly try my best. And dear colleagues, it's such a pleasure to be with you here today for this exchange on a really important issue, which is alternatives to detention. And it comes at a really important time because we're less than 4 months away from the first International Migration Review Forum of the Global Compact on Migration. And at the forum, we will have a responsibility to really assess honestly the progress that's been made to date with the Compact's implementation and identify suitably ambitious targets, the attainment of which will certainly improve our collective efforts towards furthering the welfare of migrants and their communities. So let me take this opportunity to praise the work of this network working group on alternatives to detention as a model of really excellent collaboration, not only within the UN system, but also with our key partners and member states. And indeed, it's only through such a partnership that we can realize the commitments and aspirations contained in Objective 13 of the Compact. Now, in accordance with international law, immigration detention must be a measure of last resort and must always be necessary, proportionate, and lawful. The reality is, however, that such detention can become arbitrary, unnecessarily prolonged, or not subject to sufficient independent oversight or independent review. Children should not be detained. Instead, appropriate reception and care arrangements remain the best measure, as the rights to liberty and freedom of movement of children should always be respected. We really must double up our efforts and explore and increase the use of alternatives to detention. I'm therefore really pleased to be here at this exchange, which embodies the spirit of the Global Compact, bringing together member states, including the Compact champion countries and stakeholders, with a view to improving cooperation through good practices on alternatives to detention, despite the sensitivities surrounding this topic. It's really gratifying to see examples of promising practices since we began our collective work on this, including on temporary regularization programs, scaling up community-based alternatives to immigration detention, and ending child immigration detention. The Secretary General's report on the Global Compact, released earlier this week, provides us all with further impetus on this issue. The report notes the significant impacts on mobility restrictions caused by the pandemic and the responses to it. The picture is mixed. Some member states adopted non-custodial measures in acknowledgement of the impossibility of physical distancing in detention centers, while also recognizing that such alternatives to detention could improve access to health services. And what I actually saw in the country I was in at the time is that, yes, it improves access to health services, but also push the broader question around alternatives to detention, and very positively so. Unfortunately, other examples showed worrying trends of increased detention of more migrants for longer periods, using public health concerns as the justification. The Secretary General in his report acknowledged the strong arguments in favor of the effectiveness of advancing non-custodial alternatives to immigration detention and steps towards ending child immigration detention. Notably, the evidence base supports changing practices and policies, drawing on a true whole of government and whole of society approach, including with government officials, health experts, and immigration case managers. The Secretary General has called on member states to learn from these practices in order to end child immigration detention and really invest in non-custodial alternatives to ensure that detention is a measure of absolute last resort only. So events like today's peer exchange provide a platform for member states to exchange information on such measures, trading experiences, and lesson learned. This can hopefully prompt other countries to follow suit and recognize that such alternatives do not negatively impact public health risks. Colleagues, as we move towards the IMRF, let's consider how to concretely advance non-custodial alternatives to immigration detention and end the detention of migrant children. As you know, the network has set out a pledging initiative towards the IMRF to build momentum for the continued implementation of the Global Compact. We've seen the advancements from your work so far on this issue. And if I may, I ask that we consider what pledges could look like. So these could include: 1, expanding the use of non-custodial community-based alternatives to detention and improve reception alternate care facilities. 2, establish standard operating procedures and train frontline staff on rights-respecting screening, assessment, and referral processes that divert vulnerable migrants into appropriate community-based alternatives to detention. 3, providing disaggregated data on detention and on alternatives to detention that can be shared through the network's repository of practices and which could then be replicated in other settings. 4, improving independent monitoring of migrant detention and increase civil society access to places of detention. And 5, passing legislation to end immigration detention of migrant children. I hope that today's exchange will provide an opportunity to consider such pledges. Let me take this opportunity to say how proud I am to be here on behalf of IOM. As coordinator of the network and one of the members of this network working group, IOM is contributing its own tools and expertise to this important work on alternatives to detention. Finally, I thank wholeheartedly the International Detention Coalition, UNICEF, and UNHCR for their outstanding leadership of this work on behalf of the network. I look forward to our discussion and thank you for your attention. Verena, I pass it back to you.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed listening to you. I wish I could give you more time. I particularly wanted to thank you for being, to actually, in a way, challenge us to say, look, pledges are not an abstract thing. They're concrete, and they can range from as you provided a couple of ideas and suggestions for inspirations, depending on where a government, of course, finds itself on the spectrum of already having in place alternatives to detention or thinking about putting them into place or already having, outlawed the use of migrant detention of children, or as Colombia has said, never had practiced it in the first place. There is this huge scope that you've outlined, from improving the data to improving monitoring and supervision to literally passing laws, as we heard from Mexico earlier, that that move you into the ending child immigration detention or really scaling up the use of alternatives in a particular country context. So thank you for this. I do want to now pass the floor, and I hope you can stay. So if there are questions coming up in the Q&A, or maybe more additional ideas from other member states here with us in terms of what kind of pledges could we think about individually as countries, but perhaps even champion countries coming together and saying, look, like in this peer exchange format, we actually want to move forward together. So I think there is creativity that is, out there for us to tap into, whether countries pledge on their own, whether countries want to pledge together to really move us on that roadmap forward. But now, Veronica Montoya, I really wanted to hear from you. You are, as I highlighted before, originally from Venezuela. You have spent some time in Colombia. You're now in Mexico. You are a scholar of migration studies, but also a migrant yourself. Why really, I wanted to ask you, does it matter to you and to so many other young people that we don't just talk, but that we actually walk the talk in meeting the objectives of the Global Migration Compact on alternatives to detention, on Objective 13, and why does the IMRF matter to you? So over to you, Veronica. I don't know if you decided to speak in Spanish or English, so colleagues, in case Veronica speaks in Spanish, please use the interpretation button so you can follow us. Veronica, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I will be speaking in Spanish, so in that case, please go and follow the interpretation. Bueno, primero que nada, muchísimas gracias por el...
So first off, thank you very much for having given me the floor. I would very much like to be able to respond to your questions. My name is Veronica Montoya. I'm from Venezuela, and right now I'm part of the Youth and Children's Platform as one of the focal points for Latin America. And I would like to ask you a question. Have we ever thought about what impact it would have to sort of pack up your entire lives into a rucksack and basically just be on the move? Many migrants can tell you the difficulties of this emotionally and physically. And I can tell you it's very sad to come to the conclusion that the place that you were born is actually dangerous. There's no future possibilities for you, and it actually violates your human rights. And as a consequence of this, you often involuntarily have to start up a new life somewhere else. So you're obviously subject then to xenophobia, to discrimination, and supposedly we're all bad, we can be chucked out, deported, or detained, and this is something that's a really hard pill to swallow. And there are very many policies that are discriminative, criminalizing, etc., and all of this just re-victimizes us, and it just means that there's more objectives and more barriers to be crossed, and it's to be added to the high levels of transnational crime and breaches of our human rights. We have the right to migrate, to decide not to migrate. We have the right for the international community to protect and safeguard our human rights, whatever our migratory status be, whether this be reception countries or countries of origin. So recognizing our rights is the first way to signal just how inhumane this detention is. Migration will continue to exist, it always has, but we are going to continue to have that right to migrate. So migratory detention is not going to contribute to detain it, even if it's going to make countries feel that they're keeping themselves safe from these dangers. In fact, if a person's detained, there's also that impossibility of being able to integrate into their new community or to go back to their home country. This is once again making them vulnerable and violating their human rights, which is dangerous for the entire society. So impact of detention on people who are migrants or migrants around the world has been compiled, and it has been stated by academics, activists, and even international organizations. But for us, migrant people, this is a constant everyday reality. It's a decision for those people that are in decision-making roles to actually take. And I think that those that are here present today in every country in the world has a debt to pay to migrant people. And you have to please recognize our leadership and the fact that we can be agents for change in our own reality. And we shouldn't shy away from the commitments that are being put forward here to give us these rights and to give our communities these rights. So in this space, you're hearing about practical solutions as to how to eradicate this detention, and there are viable alternatives being put on the table. We know that this isn't going to happen overnight and that there will be an adaptation period, and we hope that this comes with recognising the obligations on the part of governments to recognise migrant people's rights and to stop the detention of boys, girls and adolescents, and to look for alternatives to detention, that it be the last resort in exceptional cases only, and that this should be dealt with proportionally and reasonably, and it should take place in conditions of human dignity, and there should be time limits placed on it, and there should also be decisions taken on migratory policy so as to reintegrate migrants that were detained, and that could include them going home to their home countries if they were to so desire and if it were possible. So we need to listen to young activists, listen to their ideas and their feelings, and open spaces for decision making that are much more accessible and that are collaborative, so that we can follow up and collaborate with these young people. We aren't just the future, we also already belong to the present. We have to take our role in situations of leadership and power, and we demand this. Thank you so much for giving me this space.
Thank you, Veronica. Thank you, muchas gracias for being here today, and I think for reminding us on 3 key points. Not only that detention will not deter a lot of young migrants like yourself that either have no choice or have no option and need to leave, but also that there is that experience where your life ends up having to fit in one rucksack, and how that feels and how that makes you feel when on top of it you keep on being perceived as a threat. But I also want to underline a point that you did make, that is, how do we make sure that young migrants like yourself are at the table, are in the discussions, not just now, but all the way from now till the IMRF and till the adoption of the Progress Declaration. So I think this is an important reminder of the opportunity really here of involving young people in any country context, as governments explore pledges, as governments explore how to take forward the alternatives to detention and the alternative ways to manage migration without needing to resort to detention. So thank you so much, Veronica, for joining us. It is now my great pleasure that I'm able to introduce Mr. Boravut Smooth-Khalin from the Thai mission, and I see you already. Welcome. It's so wonderful that you could be here. You are the Minister Counselor at the Permanent Mission of Thailand in Geneva, so around the corner, so to speak. There you're heading up the human rights, humanitarian and disarmament sector, but also you are bringing a lot of experience, and I know that you've been equipped with a lot of insights on the Thai experience of really, in your national context, as well as globally, being a champion on moving towards alternatives to detention. So please do share with us the experience and maybe also some inspirational encouragement to other member states that can learn and hear and listen and maybe join you as we are moving forward towards thinking of pledges and next steps leading up to the IMRF. The floor is yours, Mr. Smooth-Khalin.
Thank you very much, Verena. Can you hear me? Well, thank you very much for the kind introduction and for giving me the floor. So, Excellency, distinguished participants, at the outset, I would like to thank the host for organizing the peer learning exchange for another time, which I believe is the 3rd time already. Thailand has always co-sponsored peer learning exchanges because we see the benefits of a frank and open discussion and exchange of experiences among friends. So today I'm honored to be part of an excellent panelist on the session focusing on the roadmap towards Objective 13 of the GCM in the IMRF and beyond. Indeed, each country experience is different due to different specific contexts. So there's no one size fit all. But however, I believe that it's beneficial that we learn from each other. So allow me to indulge myself in sharing with you the Thailand experience on ATD from the start up until today. We would also like to highlight at the outset here some key elements or ingredients that are essential to Thailand's work on ATD. Namely, one, political will, which I believe also translates into bureaucratic dedication and readiness. Two is a whole of government and whole of society approach, as well as innovation. And three, last but not least, is an overarching principle in always placing the best interests of the child at the center of any decision or consideration. So these elements will be reflected throughout my presentation today, and will also form a basis of our roadmap and future undertaking in order to achieve GCM Objective 13. So without further ado, let me start with the first part of my presentation, which is progress made in Thailand towards Objective 13, as well as tangible results and challenges. Of course, the ATD in Thailand is always work in progress. Our Prime Minister has pledged to adhere to non-detention of children at the IDC, at the Leaders Summit on Refugees in 2016. So the pledge gave way gradually to the use of ATD, both in policy and practice in Thailand. One of the key achievements in Thailand, I believe, is the MOU on the ATD of children in IDC signed among 7 different government agencies. So the MOU provides a solid ground, indicating roles and responsibilities of agency concerned. The SOP attached to the MOU also provide guidelines and procedure for the use of ATD for migrant children under the age of 18, and for the provision of social and other services for children and their family. Under the MOU, a multidisciplinary working group is established, comprising immigration and child protection officials and representatives of UN agencies. This working group plays an important role in trying to find alternative care measures for children. The MOU and SOP have been instrumental in reducing the numbers of migrant children in IDC in Thailand. Since 2018, a few hundreds of children and their families in IDC have received assistance while awaiting durable solution. Best efforts have been made to ensure that children and their parents stay together and receive adequate care and protection. While working very closely with NGO partners, Thailand continued to increase the use of community-based alternatives to immigration detention. This method, we believe that it allows children to enter into the country child protection system and gain access to services, education, and healthcare in particular. It also helped reducing the risk of children being exploited. However, challenges remain, of course, one of which is the lack of awareness on ATD and SOP among agencies at local levels, and at times insufficient capacity to implement it. And two, there might be a need for long-term care, given the fact that the resettlement quota is very limited, and this requires additional budget and long-term strategy. The second part of my presentation will be on whole of government and whole of society approach in the use of ATD in Thailand. Let me highlight again, these two major approaches really significantly contribute to the use of ATD in Thailand. The interagency MOU I just mentioned earlier reflects a whole of government approach. The government also adopted whole society approach by working very closely with NGOs, private sector, and international organizations. In 2021, a national migrant children and youth-led advocacy workshop was organized by the Ministry of Social Development and Human Security, together with other partners, of course, where migrant children got to voice their needs and learn more about GCM and its effects. This year, Ministry of Social Development is planning another round of consultation with migrant children in order to draft a national plan on rights of the child in the context of migration. So together with collaboration with NGO, private sector, and international organization, we believe, as well as what Veronica just said, that I think the engagement with the children and youth, especially the migrant children and youth who's directly affected by this problem, is a key to success of whole of society approach to the ATD. The last part of my presentation is on the improvement of application ATD measures in Thailand. Of course, there's always a room for improvement. For Thailand, I want to highlight two parts, two aspects. One is on capacity building and training. In 2021, of course, we, together with UN agency, organized training of officials on the protection of migrant children to raise awareness and strengthen the capacity of immigration officers and social workers for better protection of migrant children. And I think it's quite useful, and of course we need more of this. Second is on how to make the system already in place sustainable. So for Thailand, we, together with UNICEF and IDC, develop monitoring, evaluation, and learning framework to track progress on the MOU that, we just mentioned that 7 agencies signed. As of now, government agencies concerned are discussing on how to develop a set of indicators that will serve as a basis for further review and improve the application of MOU process. So in closing, for the way forward to the IMIF and beyond, so I hope that you find our experience and key ingredients useful in contributing towards creating a roadmap of your own, of course, to advance GCM Objective 13. In the lead up to the IMIF, Thailand will consider making a pledge related to Objective 13 favorably. And thanks to the idea from the DDG of IOM on the potential of IMIF pledges, I think Thailand, we have done quite a few already, and we know that there are a number of them that we can do and we should do. And of course, there might be some challenges in some, but then it's something that we have to focus on and move forward on this as well. So we hope that others will do the same. In essence, IMIF is an important milestone to take stock on GCM implementation, but it is not an end in itself. So let us look above and beyond the IMIF on how best to put in place and sustain the ATD, bearing in mind that keeping children in detention is never good for children. Thank you very much. Back to you, Verena.
Thank you so much for your insights and for, I think, the very, very humble and honest reflection. First of all, the IMRF is a step in the process, as you said, and you started off reflecting on Thailand's experience as work in progress. And I think this is exactly the attitude that we need to see. And I think we it's so good to see it in your case, but it's also, really an invitation to look around the room. Everyone here in the room, we know, has a contribution to make in terms of progress made. Whatever the starting point has been to really, experiment, invest, try out different ways of managing the migration with different alternatives to detention. So I very much hope that this is an encouragement to colleagues who are with us here to also maybe come in with questions to you or questions to others on that progress roadmap that you've highlighted from your own experience. The political will, the bureaucratic readiness, from an MOU to an SOP, the involvement of young migrants themselves in the process, capacity building, and really now looking ahead, how do we scale this? How do we take this? And how and what contribution can Thailand continue to make in this global context? So thank you so much for your contribution. I have 1,000 questions, but I do not want to monopolize the discussion. I do actually wanted to see if Ms. Daniels is with us. And if you wanted to come in for a quick reflection, we've heard now from Thailand, a very concrete progress declaration in a way, sharing an experience. We heard from Veronica the reminder that packing your life in a rucksack sounds easy, but it isn't easy, and the importance and the opportunity of involving young migrants in the processes ahead. And we will in a moment hear from UCLG, the United City and Local Government, the role the cities can play. But as you are listening to this, is there something that strikes you as particularly important that you would like to interject at this point? Back to you.
Thank you very much, Verena, for giving me the floor again. And unfortunately, I'll have to leave after this. But I was really struck listening to both speakers. First of all, for Veronica, thank you so much for the reminder. And even for me, in my own experience, I with my family, we fled Nigeria in the middle of the night during the Biafran Civil War. So Veronica really highlighted the human rights angle and the experience for migrants and what the experience is for migrants leaving their country. And Verena, as you highlighted, the upcoming IMRF is really a call to all member states to ensure the engagement of young migrants, but really the meaningful participation of young migrants in the process. And the PR of Thailand had said very correctly that the IMRF is a stock take of how far we've come, but it's also really important to recognize that it's also laying the way forward and the priorities and addressing the gaps and building on what the successes are. And it's the ideal opportunity to really put young people, young migrants at the center of that. So that's one reflection. And then the second reflection, listening to the PR from Thailand, and Verena, you had covered the issue of scalability. I think what was also really important that he spoke to is also sustainability, and that the MOU, the SOPs, yes, really important, but how do you make sure that the whole of system approach is really embedded and enabled and capacitated to deliver on it, and what the experience is there. So I think that's particularly important. Really excellent to hear the thinking around the pledge, because certainly there's a lot that the government of Thailand can pledge to, building on what has already been done. I definitely want to applaud that effort, and I look forward to staying engaged in the build up to the IMRF. But for now, I take my leave, and thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you so much, Ms. Daniels. It's great to have you with us. We continue to, I'm sure we will be seeing you more and more as we're leading up and gearing up. And thanks for the sort of critical reminder that it's not just about scaling up, it's about sustaining the effort. And I think the opportunity of the IMRF is to reflect back where we are, where and how can we scale, make pledges on scale, and then work together on ensuring that what we do going forward is sustainable. So thank you so much for being with us. It is now a pleasure that I'm able to introduce a representative of United Cities and Local Governments. And I would like to invite to the floor Mr. Mustafa Mufid. Bienvenue. I understand that you've been stepping in at last minute for Jean-Pierre Elong Bassi. So really appreciate that you have made yourself available. We've been looking forward to hear from United Cities and Local Government, and you are representing UCLG Africa. So I look forward to hearing from you in terms of what is and can be the contributions that cities and networks or big alliances like UCLG can make to really make sure that the IMRF is more than a talk shop in Geneva, but that it makes and touches and changes lives on the ground, and that cities can pull their own weight to really move us towards availability and accessibility at scale of reception and care capacities, community-based, family-based reception, and the kind of alternatives that we are looking forward that make migration detention unnecessary. Over to you, Mr. Mufid. On n'écoute pas. Vous pouvez... Oui, vous êtes encore... Oui,
c'est bon,
ça va.
vous m'entendez?
Oui,
Parfait.
vous avez la parole.
Parfait, merci beaucoup. Donc, je suis Moustapha
Well, thank you very much. I'm Mustafa Mufid. I'm the Director of Culture, Migration and Peace and Security, representing local government in Africa. I'm representing Jean-Pierre Lambassic, who's the General Secretary of CLGU Africa, UCLG Africa. And I would like to share with you the involvement of our organization and the African cities. First, as introduction, you have to know that Africa is the region in the world that experiencing a huge mutation of its populations, internal migration from rural areas to urban areas, poor country to rich country, and flows of people moving towards the sea. We're also having a huge crisis, wars that are leading to forced displacement. In November 2015, during the Afri-City Summit in Johannesburg, the local governments in Africa have adopted the charters of local territorials, where all members have decided to create welcoming cities. All that has been confirmed and completed during the 8th Summit of Afri-City in November 2018 in Marrakesh. So the idea behind this charter is to build strategic alliances between the cities at all levels, local, regional, and national, to give to put on the first place respect human dignity and migrant rights at the forefront of our actions. That was happening in parallel with local authorities in Europe, America, and Asia have launched also networks between cities to ensure better conditions for refugees, asylum seekers who were moving towards Europe and Americas. So these local authorities understand that the crisis around migration won't be solved without collaboration and a dialogue between states and civil societies to create a new narratives around migration, putting respect, dignity, and human rights at the center of their debate. And this perspective should lead towards more power for local authorities to empower migrants and to give access to health, education, basic urban services, work, school for migrants and children of migrants. Cities and local territories are at the forefront to look for efficient solutions to reduce the bad implication of migration policies. They are the players in the migrant management. Cities and local authorities are, through their short means or resources, trying to integrate migrants in the society. And the integration of migrants enable to have an access to basic services, health services, access to education, health, work, labor, and economic life. These are essential factors to integrate migrants. To give you an example, most of the migrants have technical linguistics skills that can actually be of use for private companies. But unfortunately, migrants don't have access to these markets. Therefore, they need to be trained to find their way and be integrated. During the last 2 years, the economical and sanitary crises have worsen migrant situation, but local authorities, regional and international authorities have worked to preserve in many African cities dignity of migrants and to reinforce solidarian movements. During this sanitary crisis, migrants and African diaspora have helped and contributed to the economy of the countries. And this shows that the three players, states, local authorities and civil society, the three stakeholders together can find the correct solutions to integrate migrants on their territory. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mofit. Merci beaucoup for this very, thoughtful reminder of welcoming cities being and playing a key role. And I think another really important reminder that a key part of the alternatives to detention need to be community services that are available at local level. And I know that there is a number of member state representatives here with us from Australia to the UK to Canada, across to, I saw Libya has raised their hand and others, where a key pillar of really scaling up alternative ways of receiving and providing care and also engaging with migrants is really making sure that those community services are available. And very often a key challenge is how do you create those linkages between the local level where these community services usually sit, whether it's education or health or social safety nets, and have the right link with case management support, social welfare workers, and the migration or immigration authorities, so that there is seamless and smooth coordination, cooperation, and support being provided around and for and tailored to the needs of the particular migrant, whether it's a woman, a man, a family, a child. So very, very important reminder. And I do want to encourage member states that have more experiences to share or that have reflections to share, thoughts, ideas, questions related to what kind of pledges could make sense, what kind of pledge coalitions could be formed to really progress on Objective 13, please do come in. We're about to open up the Q&A, and I did see one hand. I think it is from our representative from Libya. Would you like to come in? Kauter Ben Romda, if I get your name correctly, I see you had your hand up. You're very welcome to come in, please.
Good evening. Kauthar Ben Rodan from Tunisia and not Libya. I'm from Tunisia.
My apologies. Please.
Kauthar Ben Romdan. I'm from the ministry that provides support for children at the Ministry of Justice. Our office is one of its most roles is to strengthen coordination between the judicial authorities that focus on the rights of the child and all the stakeholder parties related to children. Tunisia gives a high priority to children, whereby all conventions and agreements related to children have been ratified by Tunisia. When it comes to irregular migration, particularly when it comes to children, because I will be focusing on children, we have an experience when it comes to Tunisia that I would like to share with you. A child and the best interest of the child must always be at the center of our attention, regardless of their nationality or country of origin. Irregular migration has become widespread, and particularly in Tunisia in the past few years, and especially when you talk about children, because of the circumstances, whether we're talking about economic conditions or living conditions that they are facing, particularly migrants that are influxing from Libya or from the north. We talk particularly about children from Africa. So in Tunisia, we do not talk about detention when it comes to children. We say that children will be taken care by. So the judge will refer them to education centers and not the kind of sanction centers. So it's not the kind of sanction that the child will be facing when a judge refers them to any center. It's a care center. So the judge will opt for the alternatives to detention, whereby the child will be considered as threatened and must be taken into custody by the judge of the family affairs, where the child will be put in the care of a social or a community-based center, where the center will or social experts will be taking care of the child. And the center or this center is not a closed center. It is an open center where the care of the child will be provided by experts. This is why the Tunisian government gives great importance to the issue of migrant children, and particularly irregular migration. We have in place many strategic plans and solutions that are on the table. We work on these with partnership with all the different partners and stakeholders by adopting standardized practical measures in order to provide the best care for this category of children. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing the experience from Tunisia. Thank you, merci beaucoup for joining us. I did want to also highlight in the chat, and apologies, my Arabic is poor, and I've just been advised by colleagues who've tried to translate that we have an example from Libya in the chat, where the experience is being shared of a new human rights committee that has been set up in Libya to specifically review various migration policies and practices, and that there is an opportunity and interest to engage with other governments to learn from each other and share those experiences. So thank you very much also for that contribution. I would like to open up the floor and really hear and invite other member states that are with us. I know many member state representatives here are in close contact with colleagues back home in their capitals that are leading the charge and working on evidence generation, on investment cases, on soundproofing available and existing alternatives to detention, on scaling up community support services, or reflecting and maybe able to contribute some of the challenges and questions that we will be all needing to address together. What prevents maybe member states from making pledges? What are the challenges involved in moving from, behind scenes, close pilots to really coming out and speaking or committing openly? So please, I invite you all to reflect and share challenges, ideas, inspiring practices, or simply experiences or questions that you may have. And to kick our thinking off a little bit, I thank you very much, Mel. I wanted to also draw attention in the chat. We have included a link where you can, just as a teaser, look at some of the ideas that also Ms. Daniels had already referred to, possible ideas for pledges that one could explore and one could consider broadly to reflect on the various actionable commitments that have been included in the Global Migration Compact under Objective 13. From very early day investments and moving towards alternatives to detention, all the way to possibly adopting laws and really shifting practices through new legislation or policies. So this is also just food for thought, where we hope that you can get inspiration, ideas, but also react. Does this look, is there something on there that makes no sense? Does it feel like it's, what support would be needed? So I really open up the floor and hope that I can see some brave colleagues who would like to come in, either with a question or with a comment. I don't see at this point, I don't see any raised hands. So maybe let me allow myself, I would like to specifically ask if our representative, our colleague from Colombia is here, because we did hear from the First Lady in the video a very powerful message on Colombia's experience and a real call to action And I just wanted to make sure that if there is a colleague from Colombia with us, if you wanted to comment or maybe reflect on this, on the Colombia experience, that you would be very welcome to do so. Let me give you a moment. Okay, no? Okay, good. Well, let me maybe then, Veronica, can I invite you back in? You have been listening attentively. Are there any reflections on your end in terms of what can young migrants contribute? You know, it's always nice to ask for a seat at the table, but where specifically do you think you see your role in the next few months leading up to the IMRF, as countries and governments are exploring options and ideas for pledges, for example? Over to you for a brief reflection.
Muchas gracias, Verena. Bueno, primero,
thank you very much. First of all, I think that our experience, we are young people, it's a very interesting one, because at the government level, international organizations, excuse me, there's some sound coming from
individual.
Open. Sorry about that. It's important to see it from the first person, how we live that, how we live politics, how we live the border, how we live the institutions. And I think this is the most important part, to listen to migrant people and refugees, what they saw, how they feel about that, because it's important to talk about feelings. Most of the times, it's not a traumatic experience, but it generates emotions, the fact of leaving your country, being in a new place. This from one side, I think it's the most important that we can have as an input as migrant people. As we are also young people, and in terms of the pledges and new alternatives to detention, it's important to democratize the opinions and the ideas that we take into consideration when writing this text. Today, in the virtual world is much easier. We are young people. We have access to these networks. I'm part of collaboration spaces with UNHCR because through the media, they open a space. They invited young people in order to share our mission, our ideas, our feedback, and that's super interesting and very good, because I could take part of that even if I was not a member of a specific association, or I'm not in my own capacity as an individual, as a migrant person. I have ideas and I'm an activist. It was very nice to have this chance to participate in this space. And this kind of examples, this initiative by UNHCR could be replicated in other instances, also in the civil society, to open spaces to listen us. Not just today with this presentation, I had the opportunity to come. I think we should open young people that don't have direct access to university, that don't have direct access to be aware of initiatives and meetings by civil society organizations, or for people that don't even have access to the internet, how to reach these people, how to bring this mic, this space to remote areas, to vulnerable places where there are, of course, young people and migrant people. That's a challenge, and I invite you to do that. We have to democratize these spaces, and we have to listen to each other.
Thank you very much. Gracias, Veronica. And thank you for highlighting UNHCR's, our co-leads, good practice for having created some of those spaces in your context and democratized some of the conversations. I see a hand up from El Salvador. I will give you the floor in a moment. I just want to give advanced warning to our dear colleague from the Thai mission that I will come back to you one more time after our El Salvador colleague has been able to speak. So the floor is yours, Ms. Cuevara.
Ok, continuando con esas reflexiones del
Yes,
interés.
in the same line and having the best interests for children and adolescents, El Salvador government, they stopped detention, and we work for alternatives to detention for children, and we also work
Para estos niños,
of families for these children and adolescents. We also work for the regularization of the migration situation and to see the objective, the access to health service, access to free education. This is very important. From the government, we are worried about this. We are concerned about this situation, and we have regulations in all policies. Young boys, young girls, and adolescents are the main interest in our texts. And that's a bet from the state. I mean, it's our future, it's the future of our country. They can be nationals or they will be nationals in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this experience. And I think it reminds me also to what we heard from Thailand, where one of the key decisions taken in the beginning of the process was to really put the best interest of children first, and then to work out what does it mean administratively, practically, bureaucratically. I wanted to bring you in one more time to just really ask you, as a champion country on the GCM at large, as a very active and very invested actor in the ASEAN context, at the global context, if you sort of could make a wish, looking ahead to the IMRF, based on your own experience on alternatives to detention and that progress that you've shared with us, what would you encourage and what would you wish from other countries, or as a champion country to champion countries, that we could look forward to, that we could support? Over to you for that reflection.
Thank you very much, Verena, and thank you for the early warning that you're going to come back to me. And yes, I want to address the first part of your question first, when you mentioned about our principle of always placing interests of children at the center. And I think it's when I'm saying that, it means that it has to be comprehensive in the legislation and the practices. And it doesn't have to be only part of the ATD as such, but it's something at large, because I think it's quite complementary to each other. For example, when I mentioned that when we want to put the ATD for children to be in a system that they can access to other services, I think it's a part of the comprehensive legislation or policy that we have to address. So regardless of who the children come from, they have to be able to access the education, the healthcare. So I think that's why when we put in place some policy, for example, the ATD, we also been supplemented by other kind of necessary services for the children as well. So for Thailand case, when I mentioned using the example that the children that in the ATD system, they also gain access to education and healthcare services immediately. This is one of the example. And as a champion country, of course, I did mention that we've been part of the champion country for a while, and not only on the ATD, but we also a champion country on the access to healthcare as well. And I think that reflects well that we think it's quite comprehensive in a way that, like the different GCM objectives objectives have to be complemented and supplemented with each other. And I think that's what we think that IMRF should aim for. It has to be comprehensive as such. Of course, there are a particular objective, but we need to be able to view it as a comprehensive approach to this problem. And we look forward to all the support from different, sectors and, domestically, internationally, different sectors as well. And as I put in my closing, I think IMRF is not the end in itself. I think it's a pathway to the future, and it's a take stocking, but also we need to be able to not only pledge on what we will do, but we have to look into what we might be able to do. We might not be able to do it now, but we should aim for it in the future, or what we can do in the long run. So back to you, Verena. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you for the reminder that there's, of course, all these linkages, correct? So ATDs don't exist in a vacuum. There's a link to healthcare. There is a link to other services. There is a link to social protection, child protection, education. Thank you. This is an important one. And I couldn't agree more with the stocktake approach. It's an important stepping stone. But it is really about the big picture. And as UNICEF, of course, from our end, there's no secret. Our big picture vision is to try and end immigration detention of children at global level. And we are inspired by precedents that have been set in the past. Incredible progress made on ending the death penalty as a practice in many parts of the world, or really looking at examples like we heard today, Belgium, Thailand, the UK, and many other countries, and Mexico, that have taken bold and brave steps in that direction. But of course, there is a long road ahead. And I do want to now really bring in another champion country that has been an active, loud, supportive, reflective, and very important voice in all of the peer learning conversations that we've been able to convene together. And it is with real pleasure and with excitement that I'm trying to invite now Mr. Mario Martins, Deputy Permanent Representative of the Portuguese mission. You have been with us in previous peer learnings, and Portugal has been a very consistent supporter of this peer learning format. You've believed in it, you've supported it, you've been providing strategic steer and guidance alongside other co-hosts before, and you've always been closing us off on a high note, looking ahead. So without wanting to raise the bars too high, what do you have for us today in stock in terms of the road ahead, the path towards the IMRF, the homework that we need to do before we wrap up and before we pack up? So over to you, Mr. Martins. I look forward to giving you the floor.
Thank you, Verena. It was it's a pleasure to be with you again today, and sadly not yet in person. So we keep on meeting online, but that's how we are, at least for now. And maybe not in such a eloquent way that the First Lady of Colombia started this afternoon, but it's a pleasure for me to share some thoughts that we gather here today on the subject of this third global online peer learning experience on alternatives to detention, and focusing a little bit on the preparations for the International Migration Review Forum. And I think we're going to have a lot of work ahead in the next coming months to prepare for this. Portugal, as you know, and as you said it's and I would like to stress and to reiterate, it's very honored to be co-sponsoring for the third time these events alongside our colleagues from Colombia, Nigeria, and Thailand. under the umbrella of the UN network on migration. And also I say hi to Jonathan. I think he might not be online, but I give him I leave him my regards. We'd like also to acknowledge the tireless engagement of our colleagues from the Working Group on Alternatives to Detention for bringing us together this afternoon. Let me also congratulate the participants. I was on without the camera, but I follow all the conversations and the presentations all the afternoon from so many diverse and different stakeholders, member states, civil society, migrants, and it was really, let me congratulate them, because it was really, it was very inspiring, it was very interesting, and I think we could all learn a lot and get some inspiration to prepare ourselves for May. We also would like to hope, or to formulate this a wish, that this exercise, this peer learning exchange, will become a tradition and can continue after the IMRF. That for us, it's not an ending line as itself. It's just an important moment, but it's also we have to look at it as a step forward in the implementation of the GCM. So it's not an end of itself. So I think we should continue with this very interesting peer-to-peer exercise, because I think it's very inspiring, even because you have a diplomat, you have a student. We have a colleague that it's in El Salvador. I'm looking at the cameras and I see we have my colleague from Thailand. We have the Veronica from Venezuela. We have Maria de Los Angeles from El Salvador. Everybody you have you, of course. So from so many geographies, cultures, but all together, sitting together, discussing this very important issue and sharing experience. And I think today, once again, our discussion, or the discussion that we all shared here, highlighted the importance of this issue, this matter, and showcased some progresses and promising practices. So I think I would like to leave a note as I'm trying to wrap up with a note of optimism, also, meaning that including in the implementation of non-custodial ATDs, and also in the context of the pandemic that we're still facing. Nevertheless, we need to be realistic, and even if much has been achieved, we believe that Object 13 is still very much underreported. So we encourage member states and all the stakeholders to engage and to report more extensively on how much has been delivered in this area. And also inspired by the content of the report of the Secretary General, I would like to share with you this note. Alongside, and I'm quoting, alongside encouraging steps, worrying trends have been observed in what regards to ATDs. So even if I would like to leave you with a note of optimism, we clearly have a lot of work ahead of us still. As we very quickly head towards the IMRF, it is key, we believe it is key that we all work and deliver on our own pledges. And again, this third peer learning exchange, it's a unique space for us to discuss possibilities for pledges, focus on a single objective of the Global Compact. And it's very inspiring. I think it's a very interesting opportunity that we all have, and that allows us for a frank and very honest discussion. And along with all the ideas shared today, I also found very inspiring for our national exercises, the list of ideas for potential IMRF pledges shared by the working group. And I think this is also an important document to have present in our exercise. And we hope, in any case, that all progress achieved in the implementation of Objective 13, as well as the pledging campaign, could be reflective in a positive and constructive way on a more substantial progress declaration that our colleagues are going to start working in New York. Despite the pandemic and all the serious other crises the world is currently facing, we are confident that the GCM gets us today more support than at the time it was adopted in Marrakesh. And I think that it's also because of this, that this space created by this peer-to-peer dialogue, it's so important. Because I believe it can create some kind of multiplier effect. In fact, the pandemic, I'm going back a little bit to the pandemic, exposed also the vital role migrants play in our communities. And they're positive and often, and I would like to stress this, and often irreplaceable contribution to the development of both countries of origin and countries of destination. So I think we are also doing this reflection, and we cannot lose track of the world context that we are living in with the pandemic. And as you know from our side, so as you know, it's no news that for decades now Portugal, and as you have said, you mentioned it in the beginning, has been committed with prioritizing migrants integration. And we firmly believe, as all of our colleagues that spoke with us today, that migration detention should always be used as a last resort measure. The use of alternatives to detention has also proven, and we all in our countries have this experience, to be cost effective, to meet international human rights standards, and to improve migration governance. Just two examples of what we are doing nationally. So as we know, we are preparing for the IMRF. As you know, also this coming, or most of you might know, this coming Sunday, we have general elections. So we believe that after the elections, we will start moving a little bit faster. But meanwhile, two achievements that I would like to report. One, the definition of more effective mechanism at national level, of course. The definition of more effective mechanisms for referring illegal immigrants, both to the Immigration and Border Service, to the National Support Centers for the Integration of Migrants, and to all the local centers of migrants, integration support. And this, it's important because it allows us to guarantee a greater speed in the process. And number two, improvement of information available to immigrants. So we have launched many national information campaigns, social media, in the streets, wherever, and for that, in partnership with national partners of several areas of the society. And just to conclude with, so formulate our hope that we can all continue to work on the implementation of Objective 13, because we all believe that when priority is given to alternatives to detention, compliance with migration procedures is improved, and respect for human rights and dignity is achieved. Thank you so much for listening to our reflections here. And we wish us all the best for the preparation of the IMRF. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mario Martins from the Portuguese mission in Geneva, not just speaking from Portugal's perspective, but also speaking as one of our steadiest supporters and champions in driving forward this forum of peer learning and peer exchanges. And I do have to make an apology to our colleague from Venezuela. I did absolutely see too late that you wanted to come in, but please do not despair. We are wrapping up here today, but this is not meant to be the end of this conversation. And I think, as Maria, as you said, We need to continue learning and exchanging and dialoguing. And of course, we are all hoping that we will be able to accelerate the conversation and concretize the discussion on pledges in particular. So this is really my opportunity to say thank you to everyone who has been joining us today from afar, from close up, from around the corner, from capitals. Thank you for staying with us. This has been an intense 2.5, 3 hours nearly of your time. We know nothing is more precious than time and attention and that kind of commitment that you're showing by being here. I would like to thank everyone on behalf of my co-leads, our UNHCR and IDC colleagues that have been designing and co-convening and bringing us here together. It's been, as always, a real pleasure to listen to member states, to learn from you, to get inspired by your progress, by your actions, to learn and listen also to you, Veronica, to hear from cities, and to be together in this. I would also like to offer our continued support. I know that us as colleagues, so UNHCR, IDC, UNICEF, as part of the working group, plus all our members, we stand ready to continue supporting you as you are formulating your pledges. We're there for you. We are happy to reconvene, to be available, to support conversations between countries across maybe along migratory routes, connecting, liaising, twinning countries that may want to particularly team up with others that are like-minded or face similar challenges. We also really will continue to stay available to continue this peer learning exchange. We are literally a Zoom call away from you. Many of you have been able to or have been in contact with Melanie Teff, who has really been the mastermind behind bringing us together, and a big shout out to her for her diligent preparation on behalf of the working group of the UN Migration Network, Working Group on Alternatives to Detention. And another big thank you and shout out to all the colleagues in the network itself, in the UN Migration Network, who have been supporting us on the planning, the strategizing, the convening, and not last but not least, the IT support and everything that just makes this meeting run smooth. I take on all apologies for missing hands that I may have overlooked in time. And I do thank everyone for their contribution. This is the beginning. We look forward to hearing more about pledges, about ideas. We are here to support, here to assist, and we are here to continue learning together. And as you said, Martin, Mario, we need to end on a note of optimism. So with this note of optimism, I am very confident that we can set a very good precedent, that this will not only be the first IMRF, but this will break the ground on pledges. This will deliver and commit us all together, from cities to local actors, to civil society, to governments and UN agencies, to continue to break ground in the implementation of the Global Migration Compact, to be bold, to be brave, to share, to be honest, but to really make the kind of progress that we need to see. Migrants, I think, as you have said, have provided an incredible contribution to our COVID response. They are part of our COVID recovery. They are part of our cities, of our societies. And only by coming together and by joining forces together can we all reap the dividends that migration brings to countries of origin, communities of transit, and cities of destination. So with this, on behalf of the co-leads, thank you to all, and thank you to everyone who joined us. To be continued. If not before, we will see you in May, and come with pledges. Thank you very much.